If you ask most people what ancient humans feared most, the answer would come quickly. Predators, lions, wolves, the thing lurking at the edge of the firelight that could end your life in seconds. And predators were real. They were dangerous. They killed people, but they weren't the thing that kept ancient humans up at night more than anything else. The thing that genuinely terrified your ancestors at a level deeper than almost any physical threat wasn't an animal. It was each other. Specifically, it was the possibility of being cast out. To understand why, you have to do the math on what a lone human actually was on the African savanna 200,000 years ago. And the math is not kind. Without your group, you couldn't hunt anything larger than a small animal on your own. The megafauna that made up a significant portion of the prehistoric diet, the large mammals that fed a band for days, required coordinated group effort to bring down. One person alone couldn't do it. Not because they weren't strong enough, but because the tactics required multiple bodies working in concert, driving, surrounding, cutting off escape. A single hunter attempting the same kill was simply ignored or fled from. Without your group, you couldn't maintain a fire through the night. Keeping a fire alive required people taking turns, staying awake, feeding it. One person sleeping alone meant a fire that went out. A fire that went out meant darkness. Darkness meant exposure to every nocturnal predator within range. Without your group, you couldn't heal from a serious injury. A twisted ankle, a deep wound from a hunt, a fever from an infection. Any of these alone could become a death sentence. The group fed the injured, protected them while they recovered, and kept them alive long enough to heal. Without your group, you couldn't accumulate the knowledge necessary to survive, where the water sources were in a drought year, which plants caused illness at which seasons, where rival groups had been seen recently and in what numbers. This knowledge lived in the group collectively, passed through generations by spoken word and direct demonstration, and it wasn't written down anywhere because writing didn't exist yet. If you lost access to the group, you lost access to everything they knew, everything they had learned across decades and generations of trial and painful error. A lone human wasn't a predator. A lone human wasn't even a survivor. A lone human was prey. So the group wasn't comfort. It wasn't social preference. It was survival infrastructure. Losing it wasn't an inconvenience. It was a death sentence, often carried out slowly over days or weeks by exposure, starvation, and injury rather than by a single clean predator strike. Your brain knew this. It was calculating the survival math constantly, every single day, for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, here's where it gets personal. In 2003, neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA ran a study that should have settled something people had argued about for years. She put participants in a brain scanner and had them play a simple virtual ball tossing game with two other players. Midway through the game, the other player stopped passing the ball to the participant. They just started throwing it between themselves, excluding the participant entirely. The participant knew this was a game. They knew the other players were strangers. They knew nothing real was at stake, and their brains didn't care. Eisenberger found that the social exclusion activated the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same brain region activated by physical pain, the same place that lights up when you burn your hand or break a bone lit up when someone stopped passing you a ball in a video game. The brain doesn't have a separate system for social pain and physical pain. It has one system, and it treats being left out with the same urgency it treats being physically hurt. Because for most of human history, they were the same thing, but social exclusion wasn't just something that happened to people. It was also something people did deliberately as a tool. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent decades studying hunter-gatherer band societies across the globe, compiling records from hundreds of different groups. What he found was that these groups, almost universally, had a specific set of mechanisms for keeping any one individual from accumulating too much power or taking more than their share. And those mechanisms weren't primarily violent. They were social, and they followed a deliberate sequence. They started with gossip, then came ridicule and public shaming, performed openly in front of the whole group, designed to humiliate rather than harm physically, then ostracism, being formally excluded from the group's resources, fire, food, shelter, protection, and in the most extreme cases, execution, carried out collectively so that no single person bore responsibility alone. The group used the fear of exclusion as a leveling device, a way of keeping any one person from dominating everyone else, because a group where one person hoards resources or bullies the others eventually falls apart and everyone dies. Social cohesion was a survival necessity, and the threat of exclusion was the mechanism that enforced it, which means two things were true at the same time in ancient human life. Being excluded was one of the worst things that could happen to you, and the group could choose to do it to you at any moment for any violation of the social contract, any behavior that made you a liability rather than an asset to the people your life depended on. That's a very specific kind of threat to live with every single day, not the random, unpredictable violence of a predator that might appear or might not, the conditional, social, entirely contingent kind of threat. If you behaved correctly, contributed your share, didn't try to take too much, didn't make yourself a burden, didn't isolate yourself from the group's obligations, you would remain inside the circle of survival. If you didn't, the circle would close without you. Your brain built an entire early warning system around this, a system that monitors constantly for any sign that you are being evaluated negatively by others, a system that floods you with anxiety before a social situation where you might be judged, a system that replays a social mistake at 3 a.m. when there is nothing else to focus on. A system that makes the embarrassment of a public failure feel physically painful, not metaphorically painful, but registered by the same hardware that handles a physical wound. Researchers have found that people excluded from a group show elevated levels of cortisol, the same stress hormone that spikes during genuine physical danger. Their immune function dips, their sleep quality drops, their cognitive performance under pressure decreases. The body is not treating social rejection as an abstract social event. It is treating it as an emergency. This isn't a malfunction. This isn't anxiety disorder as a default human state. This is the exact system that kept your ancestors inside the circle for 200,000 years, tuned to a sensitivity that made perfect sense when the stakes were literally life and death. The problem is that the system doesn't know the stakes have changed. Your brain's exclusion detection system cannot tell the difference between a comment section full of strangers criticizing your opinion and your tribal band deliberating whether to cast you out into the savanna. It runs the same alarm either way. It produces the same cortisol surge, the same hypervigilance, the same middle-of-the-night replay of every social interaction that went slightly wrong. The predators that terrified ancient humans are mostly gone. You don't worry about lions when you walk out your front door. You don't scan the tree line for hyenas before you go to sleep. You've updated that part of the threat model without even trying, because the predators aren't there, and your brain learned that quickly. But the social threat model runs exactly as it did 200,000 years ago, in a world where exclusion meant death, in a body navigating a world where it almost never does. The stakes changed. The hardware didn't. So the next time your heart rate spikes before you walk into a room full of strangers, or you feel a disproportionate wave of shame over something small, or you lie awake at 2 a.m. reconstructing a conversation that went slightly wrong and wondering what it meant about how people see you, it's worth knowing what's actually happening. Your brain isn't broken. It isn't being irrational. It's running a calculation that was accurate for nearly the entire history of your species. It's deciding in real time whether you are safe inside the circle. It just doesn't know yet that the circle has changed and that the thing it's still protecting you from hasn't been able to kill you for a very long time.